She found a box of unsent love letters in her late mother's attic. None were hers, and all were meant for a man she never knew. What she uncovered wasn't just a forgotten romance, it was the key to her own. Welcome to Stories That Stir the Heart and Soul. 1. A house full of dust and secrets. The key stuck in the lock like the house was holding its breath. Claire Bennett jiggled it once, then again, until it turned with a reluctant click, a sound that echoed down the front hallway like the first breath of something long buried. The heavy oak door creaked open, and a waft of warm, stagnant air pushed past her. Dust motes floated like ghosts in the slanting sunlight, disturbed only by her entrance. She stood in the threshold, suitcase still in hand, and let her eyes adjust to the dim. The house hadn't changed. Not since the last time she was here, not since her mother died. It was all exactly as she remembered: the velvet wingback chairs, faded to a tired rose, the chipped porcelain lamp with the hummingbird bass, the mahogany piano her mother hadn't played in years. The grandfather clock in the hallway had stopped at 6:17 who knows how long ago. Claire crossed the living room slowly, her boots tapping the scuffed floorboards. She dropped her bags by the couch and inhaled deeply. The air smelled like dust, lavender sachets, and memory. This was where she'd be starting over, not Boston, not her downtown apartment with its granite countertops and heartbreak echoing off the walls. Here, in the house her mother left her, the same house Claire once swore she'd never return to. But life had a way of circling back, and grief had its own compass. She shrugged off her jacket, already regretting the cardigan under it. Southern heat clung to everything. Even in early spring, Charleston was in bloom, jasmine spilling over gates, magnolia petals carpeting sidewalks like nature's confetti. But inside the house, time had stopped. Her first night back was quiet. Too quiet. She heated a frozen dinner, ignored the unopened mail, and tried not to think about Ben, her ex-fiancé, now, officially, a memory and a string of awkward voicemails. Instead, she lit a candle in the kitchen window and wandered upstairs, unsure of what she was looking for. She found it in the attic. The stairs groaned under her weight as she climbed, flashlight in hand. The attic door protested as she pushed it open. Warm, dry air rushed at her, thick with old insulation and something sweeter cedar. Boxes were stacked like uneven teeth beneath the eaves, childhood books, holiday decorations, a ceramic angel missing a wing. Then, behind a stack of yellowed National Geographics and a crumbling garment bag, she saw it, a cedar box, small, ornate. The clasp rusted shut. Claire knelt down, her fingers brushing the lid. The wood was smooth, warm to the touch. The clasp snapped open with a pop and a flurry of dust. Inside, nestled like secrets, were envelopes, dozens of them, pale, aged parchment, no stamps, no postmarks, just one name, scrawled in careful cursive at the bottom of each page: Ryan. Her heart ticked faster. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, told her to pick one. She chose the letter at the very top, slid it from its envelope with slow, reverent fingers, and began to read. Claire. She always liked the way sunlight looked through those kitchen curtains, didn't she? I do too. I still picture her there, humming softly, barefoot on tile. It's unbearable. Sometimes, how much I still remember. Claire paused, her pulse thudding in her throat. This letter wasn't written to her. It was about someone else, someone familiar, someone painfully close. She read on. I know I have no right, but I loved her. I still do. I think I always will. I wanted to say that, even if she never hears it, even if no one ever does. She blinked, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in on her, the creak of the rafters, the slow whirl of dust around the beam of her flashlight. Who was Ryan? And who had he loved? She read the closing again. Ryan. Claire's mother had never mentioned a Ryan. No boyfriend. No long-lost love. After Claire's father left when she was 7. There had never been anyone, at least. Not that she knew of. But these letters said otherwise. She reached into the box and pulled out another. And another. Each envelope was sealed, each one thin, but full of something deeply felt. Some had dates, some didn't, but they spanned years, all unsigned except for that name. Ryan. Claire sat back on her heels, the old floor groaning beneath her. Tomorrow morning, the renovations would begin. She'd hired a Charleston architect her mother's lawyer recommended, someone local, reliable. She hadn't met him yet, but she remembered now. His name had been in the email signature. Ryan Caldwell. And for the first time since coming home, Claire didn't feel quite so alone. She felt watched, remembered, like this house wasn't just haunted by dust and creaking boards, but by love that had never been let go. To the first letter. She didn't sleep that night. The box sat on the floor beside her bed like a coiled secret, humming with the weight of something unsaid. Claire stared at it through the darkness, her pillow still bearing the crease from her cheek. Every few minutes, she'd reach over and touch it, not to open it, just to confirm it was real, that it hadn't been a dream stirred up by returning to a place that still carried the scent of her mother's perfume. At 4:12 a.m., she stopped resisting. Claire flicked on the bedside lamp. The soft glow cut a narrow slice through the shadows. She slid her fingers beneath the lid again and pulled out the same envelope she'd read in the attic. This time, she laid it on her lap like something sacred and peeled it open slowly. The paper crackled as it unfolded, whispering through the silence of the room. Claire! She always liked the way sunlight looked through those kitchen curtains. Didn't she? I do too. I still picture her there, humming softly, barefoot on tile. It's unbearable. Sometimes, how much I still remember. I know I have no right, but I loved her. I still do. I think I always will. Always. I keep trying to write a letter that makes sense, but all I ever seem to do is circle the same memories. The way her laugh started in her throat and ended in her eyes. The way she always knew when to stay quiet. The way she touched things like she was trying to feel their stories. I asked her once if she believed in signs. She said no, but she looked out the window a lot when she said it, like she was hoping for one anyway. Sometimes I think this letter is a sign, even if it's only for me, even if it sits in a box forever. Ryan. Claire's throat tightened. She reread the letter, slowly, deliberately, as if its words would morph or rearrange the more she studied them, but they remained the same, honest, aching. Raw? There was no performance here, no exaggeration, whoever this man was. He had loved her mother like she was something rare, not just adored her, but understood her. Claire folded the paper carefully and slid it back into its envelope, then rested it on her nightstand. Her fingers hovered over the box again, indecisive. A part of her wanted to read them all in one breathless sitting, to inhale the full truth in one emotional gut punch, but something told her not to rush. This wasn't a Netflix series to binge. It was a slow unraveling of someone else's heart, and maybe, in ways she didn't fully grasp yet, her own. She finally slept, fitfully. The next morning, Charleston was wrapped in fog. It rolled in from the harbor, blanketing the live oaks in a silver hush. Claire stood on the front steps with her coffee, still in her robe, watching as a black pickup truck pulled into the driveway. The man who stepped out was tall, broad-shouldered. His button-down sleeves were rolled up, forearms dusted with a faint tan. He wore dark jeans, worn boots, and carried a leather-bound folder under one arm. He paused before heading up the steps, scanning the house like he was taking in its bones. Claire knew instantly. "Mr. Caldwell," she asked, already knowing the answer. He looked up. His eyes were steel-gray sharp but tired, like they'd spent years focused on blueprints and somehow missed the bigger picture. "Yes," he said. His voice was low, even. "Claire Bennett." She nodded. "Come in." Inside, they walked the house together. She led. He followed, occasionally stopping to inspect sagging beams or outdated fixtures. They spoke only in facts, floor plans, timelines, structural weaknesses, nothing emotional, nothing personal, until they reached the kitchen. Ryan paused. His gaze lingered on the curtains, the same yellow gingham ones her mother had insisted on keeping. Despite their fading, Claire saw his fingers twitch slightly, like he wanted to touch the fabric but thought better of it. "You knew her," Claire said, not as a question. "He didn't look at her right away. I did." There was a beat of silence. "I found the letters," she added. That got his attention. His eyes shifted to her face, searching, not shocked, just sad. Like he'd always known this moment might come. "You weren't supposed to," he said quietly. "They were in the attic, behind a trunk." He nodded once. "I never sent them." "I figured that part out." He exhaled, not quite a sigh. "I didn't write them for her. Not really. I wrote them for myself. To remember. To let go." "Did it work?" Ryan looked back at the curtains, then down at the floor. "No," he said. "Not really." Claire didn't know what she had expected from meeting him. A confession, a breakdown, a sudden, shocking reveal. But what she got was worse and somehow better. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't tortured. He was just quiet, like someone who had already said everything he needed to, and now carried the silence with him. "Why didn't you send any of them?" she asked. Ryan's expression didn't change. "She made her choice, and it wasn't me." The words didn't sound bitter. They sounded resigned, practiced. Claire felt something catch in her chest. "She never told me about you." "I'm not surprised. I wasn't the kind of story that gets retold." A breeze drifted through the open window, fluttering the hem of the curtain like a breath. Claire stared at the kitchen, the table, the counter where her mother used to knead bread and hum Patsy Cline on Sunday mornings. Everything looked the same. And yet, nothing did. She turned back to Ryan. "Well, looks like we've got a house to rebuild." His lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Yeah," he said, "we do." 3. Reintroductions and reservations. Charleston's fog had lifted by mid-morning, replaced by a warm haze that clung to everything like a second skin. The scent of blooming wisteria wafted through the cracked windows, curling around the edges of old wallpaper and settling in the floorboards of the Bennett house. Claire stood barefoot in the hallway, coffee mug in hand, watching Ryan Caldwell move through the home like a man revisiting a memory he hadn't decided whether to keep or abandon. He wore the same white button-down from earlier, sleeves pushed up, collar loosened just enough to suggest he wasn't trying too hard, but also didn't know how not to. His movements were methodical, practiced, each step measured, each pause purposeful. He wasn't avoiding her, but he wasn't quite seeing her either. They stood in the formal dining room now, the light slanting in through tall windows, catching dust particles in golden halos. Ryan studied the ceiling molding with one hand braced against the wall. "It's original," Claire said, sipping her coffee. "My mom was obsessed with keeping it intact." He nodded. "Good eye. Heart pine. You can't fake that grain." Claire leaned against the doorway. "You talk about this house like it's alive." Ryan looked over at her then, his eyes unexpectedly soft. "Maybe it is." Their gazes held just a second too long. Claire broke it first. "So, why renovations?" she asked. "Why take this project?" He shrugged slightly, pulling out a pencil to mark a spot on the wall. It came recommended. I knew the structure, and I thought maybe he stopped. Then reset his tone. "I thought I could do something right with it. Finally." The words landed between them like a dropped box of nails, quiet, sharp, unavoidable. Claire didn't push. Not yet. Later that day, they stood outside near the back porch, surveying the warped decking and vine-choked trellis. The sun was high now, hot on her shoulders, the kind of southern heat that seeped into your skin and reminded you this place had roots deeper than people. Ryan crouched beside the deck steps, tapping at a loose board. "We'll need to rebuild this entire section." "Can you keep the wisteria?" she asked quickly. He looked up, amused. "Sentimental." Claire folded her arms. "A little. My mom planted it when I got accepted into college. She said it would outlast both of us." Ryan stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That's the thing about vines. If you give them something to climb, they'll hold on longer than you expect." She smiled, poetic. "I blame the letters." She tilted her head. "So you are that Ryan." He met her eyes, the corner of his mouth curving up faintly. "I didn't think there was another." There it was again, that tension, not hostile, not flirtatious, something older, weightier, like the silence between notes in a song. Claire walked to the garden's edge and knelt by an overgrown patch of rosemary. She tugged gently at a weed, letting the scent cling to her fingers. "You knew her during her quiet years," she said without looking up, "after my dad left, after she stopped baking, stopped going to church, stopped smiling at little things." Ryan stepped beside her, his voice quiet. I knew the version of her who still believed in possibility, even if it scared her. Claire's fingers froze in the dirt. No one had ever said that out loud. Not about her mother. Not even Claire. They worked in tandem that afternoon, walking room to room, jotting notes, measuring walls, debating color schemes and cabinetry. At one point, their fingers brushed when they both reached for the same swatch of paint. Claire pulled back first. "Sorry." "No need," Ryan murmured, eyes on the swatch, soft moss green, like her kitchen curtains. Claire exhaled, her voice quieter now. "You really remember everything, don't you?" He finally looked up at her. "Only the things I never got to keep." By sunset, they found themselves in the attic again. Claire stood by the window, now open to let in the breeze, while Ryan inspected the beams overhead. She turned to him, watching as he surveyed the space with the same reverence she'd seen in the letters. "You were in love with her," she said softly. He didn't answer right away. "Then, yes. She never told me. She wouldn't have." "Why not?" Ryan leaned against the beam, arms crossed, "Because it didn't end well, and because your mother, she believed that some stories didn't need retelling. They were beautiful once, and that was enough." Claire nodded slowly. But in her chest, something shifted, something she hadn't been ready to admit. A small, quiet voice inside whispered, "You wish someone would write about you that way." And standing there, in the dust-soft attic, beside a man who once loved the same woman she did, but differently, Claire realized something even more startling. She wasn't angry. She was jealous. For the ghosts between us. It rained the next morning. Not a storm, just a gentle, rhythmic rain that tapped against the window panes like an old friend trying to be let in. Claire sat at the kitchen table, legs curled beneath her, sipping coffee from the same floral mug her mother used to drink from. She hadn't changed out of her sleep shirt. The box of letters sat in the center of the table, unopened today, but pulsing with presence. The house felt different now. It wasn't just a renovation project anymore. It was a story she hadn't been told, a part of her mother that had existed quietly in the spaces between memories. And Ryan? He was the bookmark in that story, a chapter left unread until now. She picked up one of the unopened letters and turned it over slowly. The paper was soft at the corners, and the ink, though still clear, had bled slightly into the page like time had tried to swallow it. I passed by her old bookstore today. It's a coffee shop now. I stood outside and tried to hear her laugh through the brick. Silly. Right. The world moves on and leaves no trace, but I swear, sometimes, in the quiet, I still hear her. Claire pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. How was it possible for someone to write so simply and yet so completely? This wasn't infatuation. It wasn't even grief. It was devotion that hadn't had a place to land. And it was starting to haunt her. Ryan arrived just after 10, umbrella in hand, jacket damp from the walk across the drive. He paused when he saw her at the table, the letter still in her hand. His eyes dropped to the box. "You're reading them." Claire didn't pretend otherwise. Should I not? They weren't written for anyone to read. Then why not destroy them? He took a breath, removed his jacket, and draped it over the back of a chair, because I wasn't ready to forget. She looked at him, really looked. Not the architect, not the man her mother once loved, but the man in front of her now, eyes heavy, shoulders burdened not just by memory but by restraint. "I don't think forgetting is the problem," she said. "I think you never got to remember the way you needed to." That silenced him. They spent most of the day in silence, working in different parts of the house, the kind of silence that isn't empty but expectant. Claire sketched redesign ideas for the study. Ryan examined water damage along the upstairs hallway. But every so often, their paths crossed. Once, she passed him on the stairs, and their arms brushed. Neither of them apologized. Later, he passed her in the dining room, where she stood looking out the window. She loved that tree, Claire said, nodding toward the magnolia in the yard, said it bloomed like it had something to prove. Ryan smiled faintly. She used to call it the drama queen of spring. Claire turned to him. She said that. He nodded, only once, but I remembered. They stared out at the tree together. Branches bowed slightly under the rain. The blossoms looked even more vibrant in the gray light, as if morning brought out their best. That evening, Claire found him still working in the den, measuring beams for the custom shelving she'd requested. The light was low. The room glowed amber from a single floor lamp he'd brought in earlier. She stepped inside, barefoot, holding another letter. "Do you mind?" she asked. He looked up, reading it aloud. He hesitated. "You sure?" She nodded. He set down the measuring tape and wiped his hands on a cloth. Claire sat on the window seat and began to read. I never asked her to choose me, but part of me always thought she would. Some nights, I'd fall asleep imagining her knocking on my door, no suitcase, no apology, just that soft smile that said she was home. I think the hardest part of losing her wasn't the silence. It was the echo of all the things we never got to say. Her voice cracked at the last line. She paused, swallowing. Ryan sat down across from her on the old leather ottoman. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The quiet between them was deeper now but softer, like a place to rest. She used to say that some stories don't need endings, Claire whispered, but maybe that's just something people say when they're afraid to keep writing. Ryan leaned forward, his voice low, or maybe they were waiting for someone else to pick up the pen. Their eyes locked. The space between them wasn't just physical anymore. It was filled with all the things they weren't saying, but were starting to feel. And in that moment, Claire knew. Her mother had left more than a house. She had left an unfinished story. And maybe, Just maybe, it was theirs to finish. 5. The story that wasn't told. The rain stopped sometime in the night. By morning, Charleston was washed clean, the sky brushed in pale blue streaked with soft gold, dew clung to the iron railings outside the Bennett home, and the garden shimmered with quiet resilience. The air was warm but lighter, like the storm had wrung the heaviness out of everything. Inside, the house felt different too. Not less haunted, just more willing. Claire padded down the stairs in jeans and a loose sweater, drawn by the scent of fresh coffee. She expected to find an empty kitchen instead. Ryan was already there, leaning against the counter, his sleeves rolled and mug in hand. "I wasn't sure if you liked it strong," he said without looking up. "I like it honest," she replied, crossing the room and accepting the cup he offered. Their fingers brushed. Again, neither of them flinched. They drank in silence for a moment. "I've been thinking about the letters," she said finally, settling into a chair. "I figured. I read the one about the bookstore." Ryan nodded slowly. "That was the first place we met. She was restocking a shelf and dropped a whole stack of poetry books. I was the only one who helped pick them up." Claire smiled faintly. "That sounds like her." She called it fate. I called it gravity. He looked at her then, something raw flickering in his eyes. "She never told you about me." "Not once." He took a slow breath. "Then maybe I should." They moved to the porch, where the morning light cut through the leaves like stained glass. Ryan sat on the steps, forearms on his knees. Claire stayed back against the railing, her arms crossed, bracing for a story she hadn't asked for but somehow needed. "I met her just after your father left," he began. "She was lonely, but not broken, determined, maybe fierce, but quiet about it." Claire said nothing, watching a bee hover lazily over a wisteria bloom. "We started talking, then meeting. Bookstore turned into coffee. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners into late nights walking under Spanish moss like we were in some southern novel." He chuckled softly, the sound dry and sad. "I told her I loved her after 2 months. She didn't say it back. Not then. Not ever. Actually, but she didn't walk away either, and that felt like enough." Claire's voice was quiet. "Why didn't it last?" Ryan stared out at the yard, jaw tightening. "She made a decision, said she couldn't afford to fall apart again. That loving me meant risking you, and she'd already watched someone else walk out on you once." He turned to face her. "She chose you." Those 3 words hit like a key turning in a lock she didn't know was jammed. Claire swallowed, the edges of her vision blurring for a moment. "I don't know if I wanted her to choose differently," she admitted. "I just wanted to know she had a choice." Ryan leaned back on his hands. "She did, every day, and she still came home to you." They sat there, surrounded by birdsong and memory, the past pressing against them but no longer crushing. That afternoon, Ryan stayed longer than usual. They moved through the house together more easily now, like 2 dancers remembering a forgotten rhythm. In the den, he mapped out shelves while Claire sorted through her mother's old boxes. Among the piles of books and newspaper clippings, she found a photograph. It was small, curled at the corners. Her mother sat on a park bench, hair swept up, sun in her eyes, and beside her looking younger, softer was Ryan, laughing. Claire stared at it for a long time. "She never kept photos of anyone but me," she murmured. Ryan looked up from the blueprint in his hands. "She didn't know I took that. Snapped it while she was telling a story about you winning a spelling bee." Claire smiled, lips trembling. "She used to tell me no one would ever love me as much as she did." "She was right," Ryan said softly, "but maybe someone could love you differently." Claire felt something shift in her chest. Not ache, not confusion. Possibility. Later that night, long after Ryan had left, Claire stood in her mother's old bedroom. The walls were bare now, the furniture covered in sheets, waiting to be moved or restored. She sat at the vanity and opened the top drawer. There, beneath a stack of old receipts and lipsticks, was a single card, folded, yellowing. Her mother's handwriting on the outside, in case she ever asks. Claire unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Claire, you asked me once if I ever fell in love again. I said no, that wasn't the truth. His name was Ryan, and I didn't fall. I walked into it slowly, with my eyes open, but I couldn't give him what he deserved without taking something from you. I chose you, and I'd do it again, but I want you to know, my heart was big enough for both of you. You just needed it more. Don't be afraid of love, even if I was." "Mom." Claire's tears came without warning. Not from pain, but from release. The story was no longer missing. It had simply been waiting. 6. The spark we didn't expect. By Thursday, the rhythm of the renovation had changed. There was still hammering, still dust on the stairs, still paint chips in her hair and coffee mugs forgotten on windowsills. But now, there were also pauses, glances that lasted too long, conversations that meandered like river currents, gentle, winding, unafraid of silence. Claire wasn't sure when it had started. Maybe it was the letter in her mother's vanity drawer. Maybe it was the quiet way Ryan listened when she read them aloud. Or maybe it was simply how he looked at her, not like a ghost of someone he'd lost, but like someone here, breathing, real, unfinished. She was starting to feel like herself again. Or, more terrifyingly, someone entirely new. They were in the study that afternoon, reorganizing her mother's dusty collection of first editions and half-filled journals. The storm windows had finally been replaced, and light poured in through the glass, casting soft reflections across the walnut floors. Claire balanced precariously on a stepladder, reaching for a box on the top shelf. "Careful," Ryan said, setting down a level and stepping closer. "I've got it," she called over her shoulder, fingers grasping the edge. The box teetered. Ryan moved fast, one hand on her waist, the other steadying the ladder. Claire gasped, the sudden heat of his touch cutting through the cool air like sunlight on skin. "Okay," she exhaled. "Maybe I didn't have it." He didn't let go right away. Neither did she move. The silence was full, not awkward, not even loaded, just alive. Their eyes met, his hand still resting gently on her hip. He cleared his throat, stepping back. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said softly. "Stepping down? Thanks for the save." He nodded, his voice quieter now. "Anytime." That evening, the air grew cooler, and the scent of salt drifted in from the coast. Claire opened the French doors to the back garden, letting the breeze roll through the dining room where they had spread blueprints and design sketches across the table. Ryan stood over them, pencil behind one ear, hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it all day. Claire walked in carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Negotiation fuel," she said, setting one down beside him. He raised a brow. "We negotiating now?" "I like to think of it as creative compromise." He grinned, leaning over the plans. "Let me guess, you still want to keep the exposed brick in the pantry. And you still think it's structurally pointless." "It is structurally pointless. But it's charming. It's ancient." She sipped her wine, smirking. "So am I." He laughed full and unguarded, and Claire felt it ripple through her like warmth, not just amusement, but ease, as if something had finally unclenched between them. As twilight deepened, they moved to the living room, now cleared of furniture except 2 chairs and a vintage record player Claire had unearthed in the attic. She sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a crate of vinyls. Ryan leaned against the wall, sipping wine, his gaze more open now, less guarded. "You find anything good?" he asked. "Depends. How do you feel about Ella Fitzgerald?" "I feel like she makes everything better." Claire raised a brow. "Good answer." She placed the record on the turntable, the room filled with warm static, then the buttery croon of "The Nearness of You." Claire closed her eyes, swaying slightly as she sat. "My mom used to play this while writing, said it made the words come out softer." Ryan nodded, watching her. She wasn't wrong. The moment stretched, and something shimmered in the space between them. Nostalgia, maybe, but also something new, rawer, more present. Claire looked up. "Tell me something I don't know about you." He thought for a beat. "I played guitar in high school, badly, nearly started a band." She laughed. "Name." "Fifth Gear." "Oh no." "Yeah, I'm not proud." Claire smiled, then leaned her head back against the arm of the chair. "You know, I used to think falling in love would feel like fire. You know, heat, urgency, chaos." Ryan's voice was soft, and now... She looked at him, her expression bare. "Now it feels more like this." The room grew still. Ryan set down his glass. He crossed the space slowly, deliberately, and knelt in front of her. He didn't speak. Neither did she. He leaned in, slowly giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, tentative at first, then fuller, anchored in everything they hadn't said and everything they no longer had to. The kiss was warm, real, a beginning, not a conclusion. When they finally parted, Claire opened her eyes and whispered, "Was that a compromise?" Ryan smiled, brushing his thumb gently across her cheek. "No, that was something I've been wanting to do since the second you opened that attic box." Outside, the wind stirred the wisteria. Inside, the house seemed to breathe for the first time in years. 7. The letter she writes. The kiss hadn't changed everything, but it had shifted something. The next morning, Claire woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt earned, like a held breath finally exhaled. She lay in bed listening to the soft stirrings of the world, waking up birds trilling outside the window, the faint creak of wood as the house settled, and her own heart beating slow and steady. The ache in her chest was different now. Not hollow, not anxious. Just open. She reached instinctively for the box on her nightstand, the cedar one, the one with Ryan's letters. Her fingers lingered on the lid, but she didn't open it this time. Not today. Instead, she walked down to the kitchen barefoot, made coffee, and pulled out her mother's old stationery set from the drawer beside the stove. Cream paper, a fountain pen, faint lavender scent. She sat at the table, the same spot where she'd found the first letter, and began to write, not from a place of needing answers, but from something deeper. A need to speak. To say something only she could say. "Ryan, I've spent weeks now reading your words unspoken, unsent, folded like secrets in the dark corners of my mother's life. At first, they made me angry, not at you, at her, for keeping that part of herself locked away, for building a love so deep and then burying it like a seed with no sunlight. But I understand now. She didn't hide it because she was ashamed. She hid it because it mattered. And sometimes, when something matters that much, we fear we'll lose it just by naming it out loud. I think you gave her more than you realize. You gave her a place to rest, even if only in memory, and that makes you part of mine now. 2. I don't know what this is between us. I don't know where it goes, but I do know that every day we rebuild this house, we're also rebuilding something else, something neither of us planned for. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not scared of what's next. This isn't a love letter, not yet, maybe not ever, but it is something honest, something real, something sent Claire. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope. No seal, no stamps, just her handwriting on the front plain, simple, vulnerable. She didn't give it to him. She left it in the cedar box in the attic, right on top, where he would find it if he ever looked again. If he wanted to look. And then she closed the lid, not with a sense of finality, but with reverence, as if placing a new chapter beside an old one. That afternoon, Claire met Ben at the corner cafe downtown. She hadn't answered his texts for days, but she'd agreed to one coffee, just one. He looked the same collared shirt too crisp, watch always checked, eyes that once made her feel seen, now skimming the surface like they were scanning for flaws. "Charleston suits you," he said, sitting down across from her. "I didn't come for fashion," she replied, smiling politely. They talked about work, mutual friends, the weather, all the things you say when the real things are too far gone. Eventually, he leaned in, voice lowered. "I've been thinking a lot. About us, about maybe trying again." Claire stirred her coffee. She didn't feel anger or hope or heartbreak. She felt nothing. And that was the loudest answer of all. She looked at him calmly. "I think what we had ran its course, and it's okay to let things end." Ben nodded, but she could tell he hadn't expected her to be the one to say it. When she stood up, she felt lighter, like she'd shed a skin she didn't know she'd been wearing. That night, she returned home to find Ryan in the garden, kneeling beside the newly cleared flower beds. The wisteria rustled overhead like silk in the wind. "Hey," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Hey," she replied, stepping closer. He glanced at her, eyes searching. "You okay?" She nodded. "I am, actually, I think I'm more than okay." They stood there a moment, shoulder to shoulder in the golden light of early evening. And then she said, very softly, "I wrote you something." He looked over at her, surprised. "You did." She didn't elaborate, didn't hand him anything. Just smiled. "If you ever go back to the attic, you'll find it." Ryan studied her for a long beat, the corner of his mouth curving. "You're full of surprises," he murmured. "Only the good kind, I hope. The best kind." As night fell, they sat on the porch steps, listening to the symphony of crickets and distant thunder from a storm that had passed them by. Claire rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time, she wasn't living in her mother's house. She was living in hers. 8. The answer was always you. He didn't go to the attic that night. Ryan could have. After Claire's quiet confession in the garden, "I wrote you something," he could have climbed the creaking stairs, found the cedar box, peeled back the lid, and read her words by the light of a lamp. But he didn't. He waited. Not because he was afraid. Because he wanted to feel ready. Because he wanted to deserve whatever she'd written. It was early the next morning when he finally climbed the narrow staircase, stepping past beams, still awaiting repair, ducking beneath the low eaves where dust and light danced in parallel silence. The attic was cool, dim, and still. The cedar box sat where it always had on the far side near the old trunk, beneath a slant of sunlight that cut across the floor like a spotlight. He knelt beside it, his fingers brushing the smooth wood before lifting the lid. And there, on top, was a single envelope. No stamp, no seal, no embellishment. Just his name, written in her handwriting, slightly uneven, the tail of the Y curling back, like it wasn't quite ready to let go. He opened it slowly. As he read, the morning light shifted, growing brighter, then softer again, like the house itself was breathing in her words. Every line Claire had written folded into him like the missing stanza of a song he hadn't realized he'd been humming for years. Not poetry, not performance. Just truth. Her truth. She hadn't promised forever. She hadn't claimed to love him yet. But she'd seen him, understood him, accepted the ghosts of who he had been without asking him to bury them. And that, more than declarations, more than romance, was everything. He read it twice. Then he folded it gently, tucked it back into the envelope, and held it against his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. Claire was in the kitchen when he found her barefoot, hair messy from sleep, the sleeves of her sweatshirt pushed up as she poured coffee. She looked up, startled at first. "Hey!" He crossed the room without a word, set the letter on the table, and kissed her. Not like the first time, hesitant, exploratory. This one was deeper, certain. His hands cradled her face like she was something fragile, and she kissed him back without fear this time. No past, no maybe. Just now. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I read it." Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "I figured." He nodded slowly. "You said it's not a love letter." She searched his eyes. "It isn't." He smiled. "Well," he said, brushing his thumb along her jaw, "then I guess I should write the first one." They spent the day working like nothing had changed and everything had. Painting the hallway, measuring for tile in the upstairs bathroom, arguing good-naturedly over whether or not to keep the antique mirror above the mantel. Claire laughed more. Ryan stood closer. They were no longer navigating around the past. They were stepping into something else entirely. That evening, Ryan returned with a folded sheet of paper. No envelope. No box. He handed it to her with ink still drying on the edges. "Thought I'd try my hand again," he said. "It's not as eloquent as it used to be, but—" Claire unfolded it, her eyes skimming quickly at first, then slowing. "Claire, this is a love letter, but not the kind I used to write. Those were filled with regret and memory and longing for what couldn't be. This one is different. Because this time, I'm not writing to someone who walked away. I'm writing to someone who stayed. And I want you to know I'm here, not in the past, not in someone else's shadow. Here, with you. The way you see the world, the way you see me, it's like someone opened a window in a room I'd forgotten was locked. I don't know where this leads, but I know where it starts. Right here, on this porch, in this house, with you. Ryan." Claire pressed the letter to her chest and looked up at him. "I think this one," she said softly, "might be my favorite." He leaned down and kissed her again. And this time, neither of them felt the weight of yesterday, only the lightness of what might come next. Outside, the magnolia tree began to bloom again. Inside, something else had taken root. Not born of memory, or grief, or the things they couldn't change, but of choice. And for once, scent. 9 restoration, inside and out. The final week of renovation arrived with the slow hush of spring settling into summer. The scent of freshly sanded wood floated through the Bennett house. Mingling with the lavender, Claire now kept in a small jar on the kitchen sill. Sunlight streamed through clean panes. Paint gleamed, cabinets closed without a creak. The walls no longer echoed, they welcomed. Claire walked barefoot across the refinished hallway floor, running her fingers along the smooth edge of the wainscoting. Ryan's craftsmanship was everywhere in the careful molding around the windows. In the way the light fell just right through the skylight, he insisted on installing in the upstairs hallway. But it wasn't just wood and plaster that had changed. They worked together like old partners, now quiet when needed, playful when energy allowed, their routines intertwined without conversation, like vines learning to grow side by side. Ryan brought coffee in the morning. Claire made grilled cheese at midnight. He hummed while sanding. She sang while painting trim. They disagreed, still but now about the kind of rug that would suit the entryway, or whether brass handles were charming or trying too hard. "I swear," Claire muttered one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow, "if I hear you say the phrase 'clean lines' one more time." "You'll what?" Ryan grinned, glancing up from the cabinet hinges he was adjusting. "I'll paint every room in this house coral." "That's not a threat. That's a design crime." She laughed, tossing a pillow at him from the freshly upholstered bench. He ducked, still smiling. The house wasn't just being rebuilt, it was being lived in again. Later, Claire found herself in the backyard, under the magnolia tree, where the last of the blossoms clung like memories. She sank onto the porch steps, watching a robin dig through the garden bed. The breeze lifted her hair from her neck, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself just be. Ryan joined her a moment later, wiping his hands on a rag. "The last coat's drying," he said. She nodded. "It doesn't feel like a project anymore." "It's not." They sat in companionable silence, the sounds of the city muffled by moss-draped branches and the whisper of wind through the trellis. Claire turned to him. "Do you ever think about the letters now?" Ryan tilted his head. "All the time, but not like I used to." "How do you think about them now?" He met her eyes, as something I'm grateful for but don't need anymore. Claire nodded slowly. "Me too." That evening, Ryan returned with a roll of paper under his arm. "What's that?" she asked. "A proposal," he said, setting it on the table with the same care he used to handle blueprints. She unrolled it, brows lifting, sketches, floor plans, a sunlit bungalow on a corner lot not far from the marsh, open layout, garden-facing windows, a back studio space labeled Claire's room. She looked up, breath-catching. "You want to build this?" "With you," he said simply. "If you want to, if you're ready." Claire stared at the drawing. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic. It was home. "I thought we were done with renovations," she said, voice catching. He stepped closer. "Turns out I'm just getting started." That night, they walked the halls of the Bennett house one last time. They paused at the kitchen where the old curtains had once hung. They stood by the window seat in the study, now framed with new bookshelves and cushions in a shade of moss green, the exact one her mother always loved. Claire placed a photograph on the mantel, not of her mother, but of the two of them, Claire and Ryan, taken by a neighbor one afternoon without them noticing, sunlight behind them, heads bent over a garden plan, laughing. "New stories deserve a place too," she murmured. Ryan wrapped an arm around her. "No more letters," he whispered. "Just pages we write together," she replied. And for once, the house was no longer filled with echoes. Only beginnings. 10. The letters you never sent. The morning they locked the front door for the last time, the air was still. No breeze, no birdsong, just a soft, golden silence, as if the world was pausing to take one final breath with them. Claire stood at the edge of the living room, turning slowly in place, her hand trailing across the curve of the doorway. The house was empty now of boxes, of dust, of ghosts, but not of memory. Never of memory. Sunlight filtered through the restored windows, casting dappled light across the newly polished floors. The scent of wood and lemon oil still lingered in the corners, warm and familiar. The space felt neither sad nor abandoned. It felt grateful. Ryan stood behind her with the keys in his palm. He didn't say anything. He knew her quiet was not hesitation, it was reverence. Claire crossed the room and placed something on the mantel. A framed letter. Not one of the originals. Hers. The one she had written to Ryan, printed on parchment and signed in ink. She'd copied it word for word, her script steady, no longer trembling with uncertainty. She stepped back and read it again, not as a farewell, but as a beginning. Beneath it, she had added one line. This house was never just wood and walls. It was a chapter, and now, the next one begins. They left the house with no ceremony. No staged photos. No wistful backward glances. Just the sound of a door clicking shut and two people stepping into a car together, moving not away from something, but towards something else. The new house sat on a quiet corner near the marsh, where the tide whispered in and out like an old friend sharing secrets. It wasn't grand. It didn't try to be. It was light-filled and modest, with open shelves and unfinished corners that welcomed imperfection. Ryan built most of it with his hands. Claire filled it with art, with color, with texture and warmth and laughter and plants she always forgot to water and mugs that didn't match and music on lazy Sunday mornings. And sometimes, though, not often, letters. Not hidden this time. Displayed, shared. One evening, months after they'd moved in, Claire sat in the back garden alone, her journal open, the dusk painting soft shadows on her page. The magnolia tree they'd planted was still young, but already blooming bold and early. She smiled, watching the petals unfold. She thought of her mother, not with pain, but with peace. There had been no final message, no great reveal, just the gentle unfolding of a truth she had been brave enough to see. Some love stories don't ask to be remembered. They simply ask to be understood. Later, inside, Claire stepped into the hallway and found Ryan in the study, surrounded by sawdust and blueprints, humming quietly as he worked. She leaned against the doorway and crossed her arms. "You know," she said, "I used to think the most romantic thing anyone could do was write me a letter." Ryan looked up, pencil behind his ear, and now I think it's building a life beside someone who shows up, every day, no grand gestures, just staying. He smiled, rising to meet her. "I guess I'll have to get used to being boring and dependable." Claire shook her head, pulling him close. "No," she whispered, kissing his cheek, "you're anything but boring." They stood like that for a while, wrapped in something that felt much bigger than what they had begun with. No longer bound by the weight of unsent words, but lifted by the power of one spoken. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, and in the quiet light of their new home, Claire realized something. Sometimes, the most important stories are the ones that never make it into books. The ones that aren't wrapped in neat endings. The ones that are lived, letter by letter, step by step, day by day. Some stories don't begin with fireworks. They start in silence in the attic of a home you never meant to return to, in a letter that was never meant to be sent, or in the slow rebuild of something you didn't know was broken. Claire and Ryan's story was never about grand declarations. It was about the quiet courage it takes to open a door you thought was closed, to turn a page you thought had already been written, and to choose someone not once, but again and again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a letter you never wrote, or a love you're still brave enough to believe in, then don't keep it to yourself. Like this story. Leave a comment. Tell us, what would your unsent letter say? Subscribe for more romantic stories that speak to the heart. Share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because sometimes, the most powerful words are the ones we finally send.